From the early pioneers to the modern-day trailblazers, this documentary uncovers the stories of resilience, triumph, and cultural contributions that have shaped Alberta's diverse heritage. The presence of Black people in Canada dates to the 1600s, when some were brought as enslaved individuals by European colonizers, particularly the French and the British. During this time, they settled in Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Ontario. Black contributions to the early settlement of Alberta are often overlooked, but they played a pivotal role in the region's development. Black pioneers were among the early settlers who came to Alberta in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were drawn to the region for various reasons, including the promise of free land through the Dominion Lands Act of 1872. Canada was a destination for many African Americans escaping slavery in the United States through the Underground Railroad in the 19th century. Amber Valley, about 170 kilometers north of Edmonton, a community founded by African American settlers who came from areas like Oklahoma and as far as Texas, became a beacon of hope and unity. Amber Valley was home to about 1,000 residents. But after the Second World War, many had left to seek greater opportunities in surrounding cities.
Four original people that came to the Amber Valley settlement to check things out. That's what's presented in these murals. First church, Crothers had the store. And here's that cairn, that's what the cemetery cairn. There's it. Henry Brown, okay? He eventually became an auctioneer. Jordan Washington Murphy is where the cemetery was on his homestead. But these are the four originals. My dad homesteaded in 1912 and never got his homestead deed till 1914. You had to work the land you had to do whatever was required in those 2 years before you actually got your land title. The Bowen family did a reunion here in 2014. There wasn't much to see on their homestead, but there was a canola field. You can see this, one of the descendants, jumping around and all excited about being where their family originated. I should tell you about that's the cabin. The first Black born in Amber Valley, first Edwards born in Amber. They actually call it the Romeo Edwards house.
In 2021, Canada Post honored the early settlers of Amber Valley by making postage stamps for the Black History Month. The Amber Valley stamp features 3 key members of the community: Parsons Henry Sneed, Jordan W. Murphy, with great-granddaughter Bernice Bowen and granddaughter Vivian Murphy Harris, and Amy Brody. Sneed and Murphy led the initial settlements of Amber Valley, while Brody was a midwife who served the growing community. The foreground shows wagons of the type likely used by the settlers against a landscape that evokes their journey from Edmonton to their new home. The background shows a map of Alberta with the location of Amber Valley marked by a star. Despite the hope for a better life in Alberta, the settlers faced numerous challenges, including harsh weather conditions and racial discrimination. They often struggled to access the same opportunities as their white counterparts.
So often we were asked to really kind of play down who we were as Black people. we were asked to assimilate more. We were asked to not really highlight or showcase things about us.
My family came specifically from Texas and Oklahoma through Illinois during the Great Migration, and then settled in Amber Valley and Wildwood, and so they felt that here in Canada it was still a better option than where they were before, where a lot of my family still lives. Yeah, like there was nothing out here for Black people, and so we really had to stick together. There was a lot of communication between the settlements here and the settlements like Maidstone in Saskatchewan. Yeah, like pretty quickly, they had passed an order in council around like 1911 that like banned Black immigration from the US because, to quote directly, the Negro race was unsuitable. So there could have been many, many of us who came up here, but really were known as the Black 1000 who came and stayed and made it here and stayed here since.
Back to the history, you'd have to know Alberta became a province in 1905. Why did people settle in Amber Valley? Because at this time period, this is what was open. The earliest settlers settled in southern Alberta and then moved up north. When the Blacks migrated from the US, this is what was open. Now, Amber Valley wasn't the only Black settlement in Alberta. There's 4 of them. This was the biggest one. So settlers settled near the water bay. Homestead shows there are only 65 families actually registered land. You start off with quarter section. You were expected to turn that land from bush, trees to agriculture. You had to eventually live there. You had to eventually have livestock or grow a crop. But to do that, you had to clear the land. So lots of them may have been here for the summer. In the winter, they couldn't serve, you know, they had to go somewhere else, right? Dad worked in the city during the winters.
Celebrating Black History Month in Alberta provides an opportunity to recognize and honor the rich contributions of Black Canadians to the province's history, culture, and society.
I didn't grow up connected to Black communities in Edmonton. For my father, when he was in Trinidad, at age 16, he converted to Christianity. For him, that meant giving up most of his culture. So when he came here to Canada, he connected with a white evangelical church, and that was his community, and that's the community I grew up in. So I didn't really know very many other Black people growing up, and I wasn't really connected with them for a lot of my life. So it was after I was elected in 2015 that I discovered, well, I was only the 3rd Black person ever elected to the Alberta legislature. And I started getting invited out to events with different African Caribbean communities, and I saw how much it meant to them to see someone that looked like them in a position like mine. So at that point, I made that a commitment. I was like, okay, you know, I will not say no to any invitation with any event with a Black community. And it began a process of learning, one that had started for me around 2012 or so with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement in the States. I started paying attention to these stories. I realized, you know, hearing about these young men and unfortunately some women that had been killed at the hands of police, and just recognizing, okay, there are people that look like me who have a very different experience of the world than what I've had. So I started following a lot of Black activists, Black journalists and stuff on social media. But after I was elected then, started getting out and connecting with Black communities here in Edmonton. And then, of course, in 2016, February came and I got invited to a bunch of events and asked to speak at a number of events for Black History Month. I had never been to a Black History Month event before. So again, it was an opportunity of learning for me, a beginning of a journey. I said, well, I need to sit down and actually learn about what Black history is in the province of Alberta. So that was when I first learned about the original settlers, the exodusters, the fur traders that came before them, and some of the others. It's, you know, I sat down and had that conversation with my dad for the first time. What was it like when you came to Canada from Trinidad back in 1967? What was your experience? And so I went out and I spoke at these events, and I tried just to be very honest with communities, just say, hey, you know, I didn't grow up with this. This is new for me. I'm learning. I want to hear from you. I want to learn from you. I want to, you know, spend time and get connected. And so throughout 2016, worked on that, brought, Black community leaders to the legislature to meet and talk, some of the elder leaders, some of the younger leaders, and had a number of other things. And so we came towards the end of 2016, and we had passed a bill celebrating, creating Ukrainian Heritage Month in the province of Alberta. And, I had someone say to me, well, you've got Ukrainian Heritage Month. My daughter was asking me, well, when do we have Black Heritage Month? Or Black Heritage Day, and I said, hey, that's a fair question. So, I reached out to the Minister of Culture at the time, Ricardo Miranda, and we started talking, and we reached up to the Premier's office, and then the suggestion was, well, hey, why don't we just make a proclamation? There were 3 provinces in Canada that had officially proclaimed February as Black History Month. Alberta wasn't one of them, so that was the agreement. So February 2017, under Rachel Notley as the Premier, Ricardo Miranda as our Minister of Culture, I stood with them to declare February Black History Month, officially proclaim it here in the province of Alberta. So that's been an annual celebration at the legislature ever since. I think one of the best parties we throw at the legislature every year, I dare say. Great music, performances, and just a wonderful time. Sitting at the front beside the speaker and just looking out, and the whole rotunda of the legislature just full of people from our communities, Black faces. And you look up to the 2nd and 3rd floor, and standing room only all around the balconies. I think there was like over 300 people from African Caribbean communities in our city. It was an incredible feeling to have that happen.
I believe we have immigrated to this land. We are settlers on this land. For many years, the history of Black people on this land and in the United States of America or in the UK, Australia, was not written. Our contributions were not recorded. And so over time, people start to feel unappreciated, not seen. And so the relevance of a month to celebrate who we are, the contributions, and to create awareness and also to create opportunities to advocate is very essential. I mean, everyone says it's not just the month that I'm Black. And for sure, I agree. But it is good to know that we have this month that we can focus and bring to the table or bring awareness or have a focus on us to discuss these things. I wish we had longer. February is a very short month. And as you know, in the community is very packed with multiple events.
My connection to Black History Month is really working with organizations to support their Black History Month program and allowing Canadians to recognize the strength of the Black community. Prior to coming to Alberta, I lived in Montreal, and I did a lot of work in the Black community in Montreal to strengthen families and strengthen capacity. And recognizing Black History Month for us as Black Canadians is really important to me, because it's a time that we can showcase who we are. Sometimes people are not aware of all of our cultural strengths that we have, the skill set of our Black community. And Black History Month is a really important time not only to showcase the current, but how do we look back at history and see where we are as Canadians, and how does that, being part of that history, that early history, how did that evolve to help us to build that capacity and that multiculturalism in Canada today?
I think it's the word that you used is the idea of celebration. As an educator, a lot of people will expect that this month is used strictly to educate people and to look only at the history. There is so much more to it. We have to take a look at how this becomes an opportunity for people who normally might not even see their culture being brought out on a daily basis. We tend to actually go into our jobs and tend to assimilate so much and not necessarily want to showcase that we're Black. During Black History Month, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to actually be very proud to announce that this is a huge part of our identity, to be asked about it, to be able to share back with people that especially are interested in wanting to recognize us. It gives us an opportunity to really express who we are in a point of celebration, which I think is quite, it's just something that I think is lovely to embrace. That opportunity isn't always given to us.
How is Black history represented in schools' curriculum? And do you feel there's room for improvement? What changes or additions would you like to see in schools?
For me, Black History Month never resonated with me because it was always told through the lens of America's issues and America's struggle with police brutality and racism in classrooms. And I never actually experienced racism before, and I never felt like I was oppressed in any way for my skin color. And also, I'm not a descendant of slavery, so that kind of made me dissociate from that month. Mm-hmm. And what I wish we could do more in the Canadian curriculum is, first of all, actually talk about it, because I'm in high school now, but in my junior high, we didn't do anything. We did nothing for Black History Month. They didn't talk about, sometimes they'd mention Rosa Parks, but that was more in the elementary classes because they had a book about her. Mm-hmm. But even then, I wish we would talk more about Canadian, Black Canadian figures who did a lot for our country. And I feel like that would help more youth connect to what it is to be Black in Canada and what Black History Month is about. Yeah.
I think that's a good idea, and that's a very good point that you're raising there. Yeah.
Well, when I was young, my teachers didn't know that it existed, and so I was the young person telling them about it. A lot of my community, we were involved in organizations like the Black Pioneer Descendants Society of Western Canada, where we actually got the city to acknowledge it for the first time. That was something that my family directly worked on. It didn't exist in Canada until the 90s, the late 90s, when I was certainly around for that. Naturally, just given the demographics at the time, it was a part of it was Black American history. Black History Month began in historical Black colleges and universities in the U.S. And of course, I am a descendant of slaves, and my family did come from the U.S., so there is a lot of history there that I do closely identify with. And Black History Month would not have happened without that demographic, cultural, ethnic contribution. Unfortunately, if you don't tell people exactly what it is that you want, if they don't know, they'll just put whatever out there. So right now in the provincial curriculum, for example, my great aunt Agnes is a part of the 4th grade social studies curriculum, but the information about her is false. And the contributions that they're trying to highlight as Black Canadian contributions were actually the contributions of my great-grandmother, Velma Leffler, and although we have tried to get the province to correct that or do something differently, they're not interested in it. Yeah. I do think that, Black History Month should reflect the diversity and unique identities and experiences of people who are Black in Canada. It's not helpful to just focus on things that are happening in the U.S., although I would say that a lot of the time what Canadians like to do is pretend that everything is fine here because things are so prominent and America has such a outsized cultural global influence. We hear what's happening there and we think, oh my God, thank the Lord that's not happening here. But I have enough cousins who have been victims of police brutality to tell you that it certainly does happen here. And so I think that there needs to be space to reflect every facet and identity of Blackness. And at the same time, I don't feel any regret or remorse for the contributions that we've done thus far.
Yeah. As the years have gone by, Black people have migrated from across Africa, South America, and the Caribbean to settle in Alberta. These settlements have promoted the Black culture in Alberta society. However, differences in culture between Africans in diaspora and North American-born Blacks remain distinct.
We all still in that trauma. And we are under trauma. Why? Because never we saw the reparation.
Yeah.
Never we saw education. Never, you know, and we are growing and continue, but in that trauma.
Yeah.
So you have some who think that if I say I'm, you know, someone from African descent, from the African descent or black, or if I say that, so they will be looking me in certain way. No, if you know who you are,
yeah.
you don't have to start asking that question to yourself. Yes. So that's why I really say you have to understand the story, how it went, and don't say, okay, Black History Month is not about me. Even if maybe it didn't happen in Africa, but those people were there, you know, they experiment that. Yes. So, and then it's something you have to take in consideration. No, the Black History Month also, what that mean really? It really means that it's not just celebration, because some people just talked about celebrating Black History Month, but it's really three things. It's really to think, you know, to reflect on our past.
Yes.
Celebrate our accomplishment, and because usually they are not celebrated. We don't know sometimes what Black people have brought. Some even say that we have no story, we never bring anything. But it's celebrating that. But the most thing is to see how, you know, our future, what we want to do with our future. Yes. That's why BCW, this Black History Month, in our 3 locations, we have different themes.
Yes.
And Calgary was more on housing.
Yeah.
Because you have a Calgary community, they are very vibrant, you know, even in business. So, no, how can we do to have also, you know, buy houses, even if you want to do that for yourself, to sell, to. Yeah. So this is very important. In Regina, we're talking about leadership, because no, the Regina Black community is growing there. And here in Edmonton, the theme was on women in STEM. Because we have a lot of our women who are in business, they are in classic business, but you don't see them in STEM, and we don't want them to miss that boat too. Yeah. So we had, that was an invitation, but all those 3 locations were completely full, people, you know, listening. So it was just, we celebrate, yes, but we want also to shape our future. Yes. So this is what Black History Month is about. Now, if I continue elaborating, sometimes also we are like, oh, me, I'm from coming from Africa, from the continent, and the other will say, oh, I'm Caribbean, I'm not. Yes. Then just walk in the street, Me, you know, sometimes someone will see, oh, you look like my auntie. She's from Haiti or from, yeah. So the thing is, you can say, okay, I'm from here, from there. Yeah,
but you still look the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. That doesn't prevent us. We know we have different culture, communities. Because usually people tend to see Black community like a monolithic or people from African descent. But we have diverse, even in Africa. Me in Africa, you know, Zambia, you know, you know, I came here, this is in Canada, where I start meeting other communities. Yeah, you see? So that's why for us is that what is our common interest? And our common interest is usually we face the same thing. No Black person can say to you, they never experiment racism. They never, you know, or sometime in the workplace, you know, where they don't have the position they deserve. All those injustices sometimes we have. So these are common things we have to come together no matter where you are coming from. Then you know, our culture and all that are rich. Everyone can just celebrate with other or their own culture. So this is how I think things should be. If I can answer to your question about people who don't want to celebrate Black history.
For me, it's more about the culture than my skin color. Like being able to experience, my father's from Nigeria, my mom's from Cameroon, so having those 2 cultures come together is a unique experience for me. And that also means there's some difference between me and my friends and my peers, different mannerisms, different values, especially about like the family unit and how you talk to the elderly, and just differences like that. I've never seen it as a disadvantage. I think it's more of an advantage to have a rich culture and live in this very privileged country and free country.
Multiple cultures in Canada, from French-speaking, Somali, Arab, all of those different types of cultures that do identify as being Black. Whereas in the States, they just speak English. There's not a lot of diversity in language amongst the Black people in the States. Yes, there's Spanish, but the average, typical, everyday African-American child only really speaks English. So there is a loss of connection to culture and to roots. A lot of African-Americans do not know where they originally came from. That history's all been wiped out, so we have no idea about our last name, about our language. So the only language that a lot of the African-Americans know is only English. And in Canada, there is an advantage because we are taught, the people are coming here and they share, their culture and where they come from. And so there is a much more diverse, language and just culture overall.
Growing up in Canada, we learned that it's so important that as, Black individuals, that we have to stick together, and that's something that I've always taken to heart. And so, growing up, I always looked out for my brothers. I just made sure that they had everything that they needed, and they would look out for me as well. But it was just very important that, because you're brothers and you're in this community, it's so important that you really find people who you can trust and work with and believe in. So that's what it was like, growing up and with my brothers and learning and experiencing this environment and community.
Have you ever had someone ask you, where are you from?
As an educator, diversity educator, that was one of the first times that I learned that that's a statement that's actually rooted in racism. For me, going through most of my life, to be asked where I was from, I used to think it was such a compliment. Tell me about yourself. Ultimately, what people were asking is, exoticize yourself. Yeah. Tell me why you're so different. Tell me why your features don't look like, the dominant race, but you don't look like this or you don't look like that. All of these things actually were really harming my identity. Yeah. But I didn't realize that because, ultimately I thought being different was actually something to be embraced. Well, when I really started to realize that being asked, where are you from, is really, where are you really from? Basically, people are saying it's not enough for you to just simply say here, because you don't look like the version of people that live here that they want to see. You look like something that belongs somewhere else, that was imported, that migrated, that was a refugee. Whatever the terms are that actually create the comfort for the person that's asking, whatever creates the justification for them to believe that it's okay to create two separate camps of people, us, them, me, other, whatever those things might look like. So being asked that when I was younger, let's just say less informed, because I wasn't always young when I was asked that, and I wasn't always young when I thought that was complimentary, but I was less informed. And being asked that shifted a lot for me when I started to realize how people had to convince those that asked that question. They had to convince them that they were suitable enough to be here.
Situations, I just say, due to the transact slave trade, I don't have that knowledge. Yeah. And so eventually people kind of look at you, kind of like you said, it's kind of like, okay, well, And eventually they get over it. But how does that make me feel as a person? I don't feel any type of way because I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of my course to Canada. Yeah. So for me, it's just about educating people and just, staying true to the truth of this is how I got here.
I want to lie in the beginning is always frustrating.
Yeah.
But that's it. One of my jobs, I feel, is to educate people.
Yes.
Like if I'm working at my job, for example, I'm doing something and I'm serving someone different and they turn to me and they be like, so where are you from? I'm like, what has that got to do with the service I'm providing you? But if we're in a social setting, like at the Black History Month Gala, and someone asks where you're from, that I would perceive differently because now we're discussing race and we're discussing difference in culture. And so there's an interest in my accent or who I am and how I look or how I've dressed for the event that would draw attention to where I'm from.
Misconception is just a lack of education. So in terms of culture and understanding where we come from. So in the African American culture, there has been complaints, well, you know, the Africans are coming here, but they don't want to know us, and there's a disconnect, you know, there's maybe a little bit of a bias there sometimes. So I think for us, the best way that we can move forward is to educate each other and support each other around, you know, finding out about who we are, where we come from. And for African Americans, that sometimes can be a little bit of a sore spot because we do not know. And so maybe that's kind of where some of that little anger comes in. We don't know. And then, you know, the Africans from back home, my sisters and brothers from back home come, and they have their culture, they have their last names, they have their heritage, and we don't. So I think educating, supporting one another, and just being there for each other in these moments, I think can be very impactful.
What are some of the experiences you have pertaining to that?
You know, some of the work that I've done with Black youth has been like real heavy. A lot of the conversations I have, let me phrase it this way. So I have a lot of knowledge from my community because I was lucky to be born into a family of, you know, parents and elders who were knowledge keepers. So I've been able to get a wide and long lens on Black history, not only here, but in the United States. My granddaddy was a Black Panther. I was raised in a very politically minded, socially aware household. And what I see a lot through my perspective and what I know is when I see youth coming in and the different waves of diversity that's moved into the community is a lot of the time the youth, they go through like a cultural shock. When they realize that like they're in a place where, first of all, like people don't necessarily affiliate you with your nationality or your tribe or your language, but just the straight up color of your skin, you know, the flattening of your identity. And who are your role models? Are your role models just like rappers? Is that positive? And then you have like the inter and intra, the diaspora wars, the conflicts, the lack of understanding amongst each other. And then you put on top of that, living as a minority in this dominant society that can be so hostile to Black youth. Like I have had numerous times where I've seen it create like an emotional crisis in youth. And I've been lucky enough to know enough about the history and know enough about how previous generations navigated that to be able to pass that wisdom on to youth to help them move through that, right? Because especially in that junior high and high school age, young people are starting to form their identities for the very first time. They're really thinking about who they are. Who are they allowed to be? Who are they seen as versus how do they see themselves? And that can be really painful in a society when you realize that people look down on you, that you maybe, you know your strengths, but maybe you're not always treated equally, right? And so then it stops being fun and games and holding hands, and it starts to get real. At which point, I feel like a lot of my responsibility is to equip young people with the tools to not only build a healthy identity development, but to like build solidarity and mobilize within one another. And in the school system, that's very challenging because the school system is not designed to uplift Black youth and like support their development into fully fleshed individuals. Like we have a school to prison pipeline for young Black boys here as well, right? There are a lot of obstacles for achieving success and helping young Black kids get education and break barriers. A lot of the conversations I've had have been really heavy, but I feel grateful that I am in the schools and I am there to have those conversations because like there wasn't me being like a school auntie when I was in school, right? But I do see a lot of youth really struggling.
The one misconception is just a lack of education. So in terms of culture and understanding where we come from. So in the African American culture, there has been complaints, well, you know, the Africans are coming here, but they don't want to know us, and there's a disconnect, you know, there's maybe a little bit of a bias there sometimes. So I think for us, the best way that we can move forward is to educate each other and support each other around, you know, finding out about who we are, where we come from. And for African Americans, that sometimes can be a little bit of a sore spot because we do not know. And so maybe that's kind of where some of that little anger comes in. We don't know. And then, you know, the Africans from back home, my sisters and brothers from back home come, and they have their culture, they have their last names, they have their heritage, and we don't. So I think educating, supporting one another, and just being there for each other in these moments, I think can be very impactful.
Right from the time when early Black settlers formed a community in Amber Valley, they have been hands-on with their contributions to Alberta's society. During the expansion of Canada, the railways were created to achieve the dream of Canada, stretching from sea to sea. Black railway workers played their role in building the foundation of the province's infrastructure, despite facing discrimination and limited opportunities for advancement. This led to the 1920 creation of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. This was the first all-Black union in Canada and was a trailblazer for the labor movement in Alberta and beyond. Women have also played a pivotal role in the Black community right from the early settlements. Amy Brody was a midwife who served the growing Black community in its early days at Amber Valley. Mary Burley, who was fondly known as the Black Angel of Bow Street, served as a social worker within the community in the 1970s. Generations later, her granddaughter, Tanika, speaks on the works of her grandmother and how her family is continuing the legacy of her grandmother. Your grandmother was, like I said before, a great woman that, you know, was just selfless, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people have talked about her smile. Some people have talked about her greetings, about how she was calling everybody babe and all that. And when I read about her, I was just like, wow, this woman was just an amazing woman. Do you sometimes feel like you have to fit in her shoes, and how do you forge forward with her spirit?
Mm-hmm. As her granddaughter, I don't feel like I can ever fill my grandmother's shoes because I stand on her shoulders, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel as her grandchild, the only thing that I can do that would represent her is continuing the work that she has already done. So, you know, continuing getting involved in social services, being a social worker, helping those who are in need of help. That's the only way that I can honor my grandmother, because her shoes are way too big to fill.
Continuing to this day, we have women like Jean Lehman, an African immigrant and the founder of Black Canadian Women in Action. BCW in Action's vision is to promote the empowerment of Black Canadian women, girls, and families in all sectors of society by building self-esteem, leadership, and confidence through conferences, workshops, programs, etc.
We have to be where decisions are being made.
Yeah.
Also, we have to understand that role model is something that is very important. So our girls need us, our women need us to know that this can be possible.
Yeah.
Then they can do too.
Many years we were all asked to follow one type of culture, and that the Western culture was the ideal culture that you would present in any workplace. Mm-hmm. Now we have opened up the discussion to understand that many cultures exist and many different peoples exist. Mm-hmm. So the conversations are there. I feel there's still a lot of work to be done, but I'm happy to see that the work has begun.
Yeah.
There are lots of definitions, lots of words. I mean, when I was explaining to someone a few years ago that I experienced, you know, racial profiling, discrimination, I didn't have the words. Now I have the language.
Yeah.
You know, I have language like representation,
Yeah.
anti-Black racism.
Yeah.
I have all these words, and I feel the more we delve into the work, I think we will get better at defining these things and really identifying the issues so that we can find solutions for them.
Black Albertans, both immigrants and Albertan-born, have contributed immensely to political representation within the Black community. George Rogers was the first Black MLA in Alberta. Casey Madu, the first Black Deputy Premier in Alberta, is an immigrant from southeastern Nigeria. Madu's historical appointment is perceived as a much-needed perspective towards inclusivity and diversity in Alberta. It's inspiring to acknowledge and celebrate the contributions of Black youths in Alberta as they represent the hope of the future in promoting diversity and inclusion. Alberta, like many other regions, benefits from the rich cultural tapestry created by its diverse population. Embracing and nurturing the talents, perspectives, and achievements of Black youths can have a positive impact on the socio-economic and cultural fabric of the province. We hear the voices of our youth on the importance of raising and maintaining Black cultures within the community.
It's very important because what happens is you get to learn from these other cultures and you get to learn the ways. Like for us, we have our own perspective on life, on our family values, but there's a certain thing that I personally remember, drive myself to remember, is that there's always something to learn, right? We don't have all the answers. So the fact that we're in a community where you can experience so many different cultures and ideas, it just gives us that opportunity to learn what it is that has allowed these people to develop and evolve, and you find these opportunities. And so it's really, because we're in this community, we have to take it upon ourselves to dive into these cultures and learn from them and replicate the opportunities that they have brought onto themselves. So I think being in a country where there's diversity is probably one of the best things that could ever happen. It's your potential is pretty much limitless.
Yeah.
So with all these people, and that's a good thing.
For me, where I've seen the most diversity amongst Black peoples in my church, we have several different nationalities in that church: Ghanaian, Nigerian, Jamaican, and we celebrate it often, and we have events to celebrate our different cultures, like Festival of Nations, and it's just, for me, it's really beautiful to see all these different cultures that came from a continent that people often just boil down to this one persona.
Yeah.
They often just, like, I remember as a child, someone asked me, "Do you speak African?" And that was just so bamboozling to me. Like, do you really think
there's
that
African language?
Is that small that we all share one language?
Yeah.
But it's nice. In my church community, I never feel alone, that I'm the only Black person there. I never felt that way, because a lot of us are Black and there's a lot of different cultures and heritages.
I want the Black community to begin to accept some level of responsibility.
Yes.
And stand up to solve the issues we face in our community. You cannot have a community that have so many programs, but none is relevant to the well-being of the youth. Now, each community is responsible for two groups, the old and the young. that we assure a future for that community. So if we are capable of building big churches all over the place, we are capable of gathering people on Sunday schools, we are capable of organizing grand banquets, we fill dance halls, we organize and bring people from across the world to come to our communities to play. Why do we fall short in making sure that the next generation have the groundwork, the foundation that they would need, that we assure a better Black community in the future? The question is, where are the parents? So when we gather and you ask Black people, those who are married or single people stand up, half of the room will stand up. So there's crisis. Are we dealing with it? No. When you go to the average Black church and you ask the females to stand up, over 45% will be single. And we have the statistics that support the fact that children raised in single-parent homes end up in the prisons. This is a fact. How much more do you need to be told what you need to do? So we leave all these issues that we are capable. And I believe that God doesn't do the things that you are capable of doing. God only helps you in the things you cannot do. That's God. So we must stop blaming anyone else and begin to accept some responsibility, because at the end of the day, my dear, we are all products of our community. And our youth in prison defines our community. It doesn't matter how you as an individual become successful. You are defined by those you've left behind. We are blessed to be a blessing. So if you are blessed and you have all the things in your house, you alone, and children in your community are lingering around in poverty, crime, homelessness, who are you? And so this is the call Dr. King spoke about, that we must be drum majors. And a drum major is who? The one who beat the drums so that the next generation can march according to the drum beat.
My best idea is just start by just getting active. Start having events in the community, inviting the Black community out. During Black History Month, different events, that can be focused more from African Americans' perspective, and inviting our brothers and sisters from the continent to come and learn about us, and vice versa, and just kind of building, building a relationship there and trying to build a foundation. And for our youth, setting up activities in school, setting up after-school programs, things that they can get involved in where they can connect with each other and learn from each other, I think would definitely have a great impact.
We're seeing, at long last, I think, some real growth in terms of representation of folks from Black communities in pretty much all areas and walks of life. And one of the important things about Black History Month is just recognizing that, Black communities have always been here, or at least for a very long time have been here, right? The few original fur traders, then the exodusters, the original settlers in the early 1900s, and pretty steady since. Which is, again, why that representation you're talking about is so important, because, stories have power. And whose stories get told will tell you who has power. And for a long time, the stories of Black communities here in Alberta certainly were not getting told and were not getting seen, which meant then that we were not visible, which meant then that those opportunities, that representation was less likely to happen, because you're seen as other, right? The incidental. Something that's kind of there, but not really. So having our stories be moved into the forefront for at least a month, but then continue to be told throughout the year, it reminds people of what has always been here to some extent, what has been built here and what has been hidden. And that gives the momentum then to work on that representation like you're talking about. And I think we're seeing a new consciousness about that as we see growth in, in EDI and diversity initiatives, working to specifically make room at the table So I mean, for me, that being elected in 2015 is only the third Black person to ever be elected to the Alberta legislature, and that's in more than a century of that legislature sitting, right? And then we got to 4 in 2019 with the election of Casey Madu, you know, and then, you know, the first African-born minister, first Black deputy premier. You know, this last election, then we got 2 more. So Sharif Haji, the first Somali Albertan elected, the first Black woman elected, my colleague Rhiannon Hoyle. So those are important things. But we're seeing those shifts too in businesses, right? So the businesses are doing more work to try to make more space, to get more people into more senior positions, right? And we're seeing it in educational institutions, like, you know, Black professors at the U of A made an extraordinary effort. They commissioned research. They showed the data to the university and said, look, we are missing Black faces here at the university. They are being systematically missed. So the university made an extraordinary effort, hired 25 new Black professors, I believe it was, to expand that faculty. So we are seeing some real advancement there, but there's still more work to do. And there are still real barriers for people to get to that level. Because the challenge, of course, is there's so many things. We don't have that generational wealth in Black communities that other communities have had. So that makes it more difficult for folks to start a business, be able to operate, become an entrepreneur, move up to a higher level. It makes it more difficult for folks from Black communities to enter politics or all these other things where being able to raise dollars, not just yourself, but from your community, you know, makes a significant difference. And and of course, then just about experience, connection to networks. These are all things that Black people in Alberta still have a harder time with. So we are seeing some absolute gains. We definitely are. And indeed, we are seeing Black leaders that are working hard to open more of those doors and to bring other people into these spaces. But it's going to take more work, more concerted effort, more work to lower and remove some of these barriers, help lift people up, and make room at these tables for those voices. The other piece with that, of course, is when we want to invite new voices to these spaces, these opportunities, positions of leadership, we need to recognize then that we may need to change how we operate. That's going to have an impact, perhaps, of the culture in these spaces. We need to be aware that these people bring different experiences, different perspectives. And we need to make space for that and be willing to adapt and adjust. Really, you know, one thing I talk about often, you know, if we're inviting people from different communities into political spaces, right? If it doesn't cost us anything, we're probably not doing enough. Right? It is a challenge. It does mean that there are things we may need to sacrifice. We need to be willing to change, to make room for new voices, new perspectives, and to understand that people have had different experiences, which is going to need to change how we operate.
Well, I'm an immigrant woman, so I now have the mindset to learn and listen. I now realize that this is my children's home. I have another place I call home. So Alberta is my home, my chosen home, but for me, home is Zambia. So they have a different experience and understanding. So now I'm more open to learn and learn from them and also share and teach them. I think it's very important that we realize that like for me, I immigrated here, so I am African. But as I am here in Edmonton, I am a Black Canadian. And what does that really mean? That identity of being a Black Canadian. And for me, it's learning about those who came before me and how they came here, understanding the injustices that were done, celebrating the triumphs, listening to the stories of those who fought for us and our voices to be able to even celebrate this month. How did we get here? And there's a lot of work right now because of the funding that is being pumped into the Black ecosystem. A lot of, I think, chronicles and recordings and documents that have been created to record this history and share it. But for me, I think number one is to be open. Number two is to learn as much as you can and to celebrate it. I think do your best to celebrate. I mean, you can't be everywhere, but
Yeah.
do your best to celebrate it and expose your family, your children to this month and your friends, your allies around you.
What are those, what would you recommend? What are the fundamental values that we need to make sure people understand? Why do we celebrate that? And why is it, you know, is it the experiences? Is it the honor? Is it the heritage? What is it?
I think some of the fundamental values that we need to allow others to know, especially during Black History Month, is that we are people that's strong, and we are people with great skill set, and the contribution that we have made to the Canadian society on a whole is enormous. People sometimes try to not look at those contributions because a lot of the history is not spoken about. A lot of education is not happening. But people need to understand that everything that we come with, we are putting that into our Canadian society to help our society build. And as a Black community, the strength that we bring to Canadian society, the cultural differences, you know, some of the things that are of value to us is also embedded into some of the values of Canadian society. People tend not to look at that. But we are bringing strength, we are bringing resiliency, we are bringing capacity, we are bringing richness to Canadian culture. Because when we look at the diversity of the Black community in terms of the richness of our culture, and that added to the Canadian society, it allows Canada to be a stronger cultural country. And it allows Canada to hold a higher place in the world because of the diversity. And if we recognize more of our richness of the Black community, it helps with Canada being a space where diversity and multiculturalism will not be able to be compared to in different places. By allowing us to you know, to speak our languages and having the ability to share the cultural food and the cultural attire. And, you know, sometimes not even just those basic things, more of the foundation of the cultural values helps Canadians to recognize how important it is for our Black community to hold spaces and be part of platforms, because our contribution cannot be undervalued, and our contribution makes a difference in every area of Canadian life.
Wow. You know, society is, of course, very hard, and you know, you can't control what people think about you, can't control what people say about you, and there's no reason for me to try to change what people think of me, right? And I always say this, is that the difference is people are gonna, when you get to if you continue to work hard and you continue to show results, people are no longer eventually gonna see you by your skin color, but by what you can do. And I think that is the most important thing out of all. And if the neat thing about this is, like, if you can show that in a collective perspective or collective setting, I think that stretches beyond borders, honestly, because you're strength in numbers. And once you can show that everybody is of a high caliber, right, that makes you unbreakable.
Continuous representation of Black people across the board, from the parents at home to teachers at school, healthcare workers, and politicians, really have shaped the future and gives the younger generation hope and zeal to continue to grow the Black community in unity. A significant landmark like the Mary Burleigh Park was honored by the city in 1999 when Edmonton named the park after her, and in summer of 2021, the declaration of Mary Burleigh Day on July 13th.
The park is of huge significance to the Black community because it shows the Black community that have been here, the Black community that is coming, and the Black community that's going to be coming in the future, that we do have a spot here in Canada and that our contributions have been recognized.
As we celebrate the achievements of the past and present, let us carry these stories forward, ensuring that the roots of Black history remain resilient and firmly embedded in the identity of Alberta.